Hello, welcome to today's current news. Today is Friday, April 12th, 2024. Today we will be listening to NPR, Historical Whiteness of Running, BBC, O.J. Simpson, NFL star acquitted in trial of the century, dies aged 76. AP, Poland's kids rejoice over new rules against homework. Teachers and parents aren't so sure. NPR, how ageism against Biden and Trump puts older folks at risk. NPR, more states are finding bird flu in cattle. This is what scientists are watching for.
Let's talk about running, or let's be real, when we evangelize about it, we talk a lot about how democratic it is. All you need are shoes. But it's not really that simple. You're going to want gear, which costs money. Then there's the issue of actual physical space. You want sidewalks that aren't jagged, trails that aren't overgrown, air that's clean enough to breathe, so ideally you don't live near landfills or power plants or factories. So yeah, all you need are shoes, and space, and money, and time, etc., etc. Oh, and you also need something from the people around you, the sense that you belong in that space. Women don't always get that luxury, and neither do runners of color. So why has it been easier to talk about runner safety for women? But until recently, it's been much harder to talk about safety for runners of color. I'm Gene Demby, that's me running, and this is a video episode of Code Switch.
I definitely don't run at night. The other day it was like 7 o'clock. And then I thought to myself, I was like, oh my God, what time does the sun go down though? Because I need to be back. I felt like I was like Cinderella. This is that double consciousness. Those are the kinds of conversations that were happening in the Black and brown community, in the news in the wake of Ahmaud Arbery.
Allison Desir is a runner, activist, and founder of multiple groups that use running for social change.
Yeah, so the runner safety movement is now, I believe, in its second year. It emerged after there were 2 murders of white women runners. Runner's World then did, I think, a whole issue around women and runner safety and women sharing stories. But a key piece that was missing in none of these conversations were they talking about sexism, patriarchy, white supremacy, like the systemic issues. So everything was sort of talking about what is the individual's responsibility because society is what it is. And for me, that's just not enough.
After national news broke about 2 white men killing Ahmaud Arbery, Allison and other runners of color publicly posed that big question about safety for runners of color.
My initial call out was to Runner's World, like this is a story about a runner, right? So where are you on this story?
After people started posting the pictures of them running 2.23 miles, in memoriam, and that took off, but I didn't see much of a discussion of kind of the underlying history and the structural factors which contributed to this case.
Hint, hint, it has something to do with whiteness. So let's backpedal some. In the decades after the Second World War, there was an explosion of the new middle class, the new white middle class. People were in office jobs, sitting at their desks. People were driving cars. Food was cheaper than ever. Concerned experts, like President Kennedy, saw the rise in pulmonary illnesses and heart attacks as related to this new sedentary way of life. And so, in 1966, a track and field coach named Bill Bowerman from Oregon and a cardiologist wrote a book called Jogging that trumpeted the benefits of getting out and jogging. That book sold 1 million copies and set off what would become the jogging craze. Oh, a few years later, Bowerman would go on to start a little shoe company called Nike. The lily white state of Oregon, by the way, the only state that was admitted to the Union with a charter that explicitly barred black people from living there, soon became the epicenter of America's new jogging craze.
What I'm saying is that the whiteness of that original kind of founding culture is reflected in the way that Nike was promoting run, and even that book, Jogging, where if you look at the pictures throughout, it's a kind of archetypal white runner. It's like, I don't want to overstate in some ways the fact that like only white people wanted to jog and black people didn't. What you see in looking through kind of, many mainstream African-American publications throughout the 70s is articles about jogging and running and other forms of exercise, which are not about the kind of political stakes or the dangers of it, but about like, hey, this is a way we can build community. This is a way we can get healthy, because heart disease and diabetes are actually overrepresented in African-American communities.
That said, over the next decade, running became more inextricably coded as white.
So in the late 70s and early 80s, you have this notion of the jogger as being what came to be called a yuppie by the early 1980s. So this is a kind of upwardly mobile professional who cares about their health, who has enough money to kind of buy nice things, who has leisure time that they're spending doing like laudable activities like working on their health. After that, I mean, there are important turning points, but no one's really talking about jogging so much anymore. You hear more this kind of I'm a runner, I'm athletic. Amateur race culture really picks up, where people are signing up for races even if they were never athletes. It's part of, a broader culture, which is, I think, pretty obsessed with fitness, and running being one aspect or one facet of that obsession. The 1989 Central Park jogging case, I think, is a really important moment.
You may know this moment as the Central Park 5 case.
In 1989, a woman, she was working at an investment bank, a white woman was running in Central Park, was attacked, raped, ostensibly left for dead.
There was media hysteria, and there was a huge public outcry calling for justice that resulted in the wrongful conviction of 5 teenage boys of color. One part of that media hysteria was this full-page ad promoting the death penalty for those 5 wrongfully accused boys, paid for by Donald Trump. In 2002, these charges were vacated for all 5 now grown men.
And I think that has continued to shape conversations about running culture more broadly, that the quintessentially vulnerable runner is always pretty much cast as a white woman. And as a white woman, I can tell you that's real. But there's been no corresponding conversation about the concerns that people of color face. And if anything, the conversation has often positioned people of color as the threat to white people running. And I think that's a major oversight that maybe Ahmaud Arbery's death is beginning to lay bare for a lot of people who hadn't paid attention to that before.
Folks like to say that, like, for running, all you need is a pair of sneakers. And I think being in this space, I know that there's so much more to that. First of all, feeling like you can be comfortable moving. And what's really important to me in these communities is showing a diverse range of bodies, a diverse range of faces. But I found that the more I do it, the more folks jump on board.
Police killed George Floyd on Memorial Day in Minneapolis. You know the story from here. And across the country, protesters laid claim to public space to speak out against systemic injustices, especially police brutality. Note, one of the 2 men who killed Ahmaud Arbery is a former police officer. It's a reminder that taking up space is inherently political and racialized, whether we're talking about protests or civil disobedience or something as simple as running.
O.J. Simpson, NFL star acquitted in the trial of the century, dies aged 76. O.J. Simpson, the former American football star turned actor who was controversially cleared of double murder, has died aged 76. San Francisco-born Orthano James Simpson rose to fame in college before playing in the NFL. In 1995, he was acquitted of the murder of his former wife, Nicole Brown, and her friend in a trial that gripped America. In 2008, he was sentenced to 33 years imprisonment on unrelated charges of armed robbery. He was released in 2017. Diagnosed with prostate cancer, Simpson had been receiving chemotherapy treatment, the Pro Football Hall of Fame said in a statement. According to his family, he died surrounded by his children and grandchildren. In 1994, he was arrested as a suspect in the murder of his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ron Goldman. The pair were found stabbed to death outside Miss Brown's home in Los Angeles. Simpson became an immediate person of interest in the case. On the day he was due to turn himself in, he fled in a white Ford Bronco with a former teammate and led the police on a slow-speed chase through the Los Angeles area. The chase engrossed audiences in the U.S. and abroad as it broadcast live on the rolling 24-hour news channel, still in the relative infancy. In the ensuing court case, dubbed the trial of the century by U.S. media prosecutors, argued Simpson had killed Brown in a jealous fury. Evidence included blood, hair, and fiber tests linked Simpson to the murders. The defense argued Simpson had been framed by police motivated by racism. In one of the trial's most memorable moments, prosecutors asked Simpson to put on a pair of blood-stained gloves allegedly found at the scene of the murder, but Simpson struggled to fit his hands into them. It led to one of Simpson's lawyers, Johanny Cochran, telling the jury in his closing arguments, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The jury ultimately sided with Simpson. He had declared he was absolutely 100% not guilty. The acquittal proved hugely controversial. The families of Miss Smith and Mr. Goldman did not give up. They pursued a civil case against Simpson in 1997, and a jury found Simpson liable for the two deaths. He was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damage to their families. In 2006, Simpson sold a book manuscript titled If I Did It, and a prospective TV interview giving a hypothetical account of the murders he had strenuously denied. Public objections ended both projects, but Mr. Goldman's family secured the book rights, added material inputting guilt to Simpson, and had it published. Simpson's final disgrace came in 2008 when he was convicted of armed robbery for breaking into a Las Vegas hotel room with 4 accomplices, holding 2 sports memorabilia dealers at gunpoint and stealing items related to his NFL career. He was sentenced to 33 years in jail, but was granted parole after serving the minimum of 9 years. Before his legal problems, Simpson was well-liked, known as an athlete, actor, and the face of several major companies. He was a college football star at University of Southern California before signing with the Buffalo Bills in 1969, where he played until 1977. He became one of the greatest ball carriers in NFL history. In 1973, he was the first NFL player to rush, running to advance the ball for his team, more than 2,000 yards in a season. He retired in 1979 to concentrate on a career in film and television. His credits include roles in The Towering Inferno, Capricorn 1, and the Naked Gun series. Broadcaster Bob Costas, who worked with The Simpsons on NBC's American football coverage, said that while he was not the first African American star, he was the first to do it in a big way, an African American who broke through. The Heisman Trophy organization, which names college football's player of the season, said in a tweet that it mourned the 1968 winner and extended sympathies to his family. Attorney Carl Douglas, who represented Simpson alongside Robert Kardashian and Johnny Cochran, said that he was shocked and surprised to learn the football star's death. The attorney said that his and Simpson's names would forever be linked together in some way. Outlining Simpson's achievement as an NFL player, the Pro Football Hall of Fame said records of those contributions would be preserved in its archive. Fred Goldman, Ronald's father, described Simpson's death as no great loss. "The only thing I have to say is it's further reminder of Ron being gone all these years," he told NBC. "It's no great loss to the world. It's a further reminder of Ron's being gone." David J. Cook, an attorney for Mr. Goldman, told the BBC that Simpson had died without penance, and that the family might explore new ways to get money from the estate. Gloria Allred, an attorney who represented Nicole Brown, Simpson's family, during the murder trial, said that Simpson's death served as a reminder that the justice system failed abused women and allowed celebrity men to avoid true justice, according to a statement obtained by CNN. Poland's kids rejoice over new rules against homework. Teachers and parents aren't so sure. Ola Kozak is celebrating. The 11-year-old, who loves music and drawing, expects to have more free time for her hobbies after Poland's government orders strict limits on the amount of homework in the lower grades. "I am happy," said the 5th grader, who lives in Warsaw suburb with her parents and younger siblings. The lilac-colored walls in her bedroom are covered in her art, and on her desk she keeps a framed picture she grew of Kurt Cobain. "Most people in my class in the morning would copy the homework off someone who had done the homework or would copy it from the internet, so it didn't make sense," she said. The government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk enacted the ban against required homework this month amid a broad discussion about the need to modernize Poland's education system, which critics say puts too much emphasis on rote learning and homework, and not enough on critical thinking and creativity. Under the decree, teachers are no longer to give required homework to kids in the 1st to 3rd grades. In grades 4 to 8, homework is now optional and doesn't count towards a grade. Not everyone likes to change, said Ola's parents are divided. If there isn't something if there is something that will make students enjoy school more, then it will probably be good for both the students and for the school, said her father, Paweł Kozak. His wife, Magda Kozak, was skeptical. I am not pleased, because homework is a way to consolidate what was learned, she said. It helps stay on top of what the child has really learned and what's going on at school. Ola's brother Julian, a third grader, says he sees both sides. Debates over the proper amount of homework are common around the globe. While some studies have shown little benefit to homework for young learners, other experts say it can help them learn how to develop study habits and academic concepts. Poland's educational system has undergone a number of controversial overhauls. Almost every new government has tried to make changes, something many teachers and parents say has left them confused and discouraged. For example, after communism was thrown off, middle schools were introduced. Then, under the last government, the previous system was brought back. More controversy came in recent years when ultra-conservative views were pushed in new textbooks. For years, teachers have been fleeing the system due to low wages and political pressure. The current government is trying to increase teacher salaries and has promised other changes that teachers approve of. But Sławomir Broniars, the head of the Polish Teachers Union, said that while he recognized the need to ease burdens on students, the new homework rules are another case of change imposed from above without adequate consultation with educators. In general, the teachers think that this happened too quickly, too hastily, he said. He argued that removing homework could widen the educational gaps between kids who have a strong support at home and those from poorer families with less support and lower expectations. Instead, he urged wider ranges to the entire curriculum. The homework rules gained impetus in the run-up to parliamentary elections last year, when a 14-year-old boy, Maciek Matsu, stood up at the campaign rally and told Tusk before a national audience that the children had no time to rest. The boy said their rights were being violated with so much homework on weekends and so many tests on Mondays. Tusk has since featured Matu in social media videos and made him the face of the sudden change. Education Minister Barbara Nauka said she had prompted by research on the children's mental health. On the various stresses children face, she said, the one that could be removed fastest was the burden of homework. Pasi saw a prominent Finnish educator and author, said the value of homework depends on what it is and how it is linked to overall learning. The need for homework can be very individual and contextual. We need to trust our teachers to decide what is good for each child, Stolberg said. In South Korea, homework limits were set for elementary schools in 2017 amid concerns that kids were under too much pressure. However, teenagers in the education-obsessed country often cram long into the night and get tutoring to meet the requirements of demanding school and university admission tests. In the U.S., teachers and parents decide for themselves how much homework to assign. Some elementary schools have done away with homework entirely to give children more time to play, participate in activities, and spend time with families. A guideline circulated by teachers' unions in the U.S. recommend about 10 minutes of homework per grade, so 10 minutes in first grade, 20 minutes in second grade, and so on. The COVID-19 pandemic and a crisis around youth mental health have complicated debates around homework. In the U.S., extended school closures in some places were accompanied by steep losses in learning, which were often addressed with tutoring and other interventions paid for with federal pandemic relief money. At the same time, increased attention to student well-being led some teachers to consider alternate approaches, including reduced or optional homework. It's important for children to learn that mastering something usually requires practice, a lot of practice, says Solberg in Finland. If reducing homework leads kids and parents to think school expectations for excellence will be lowered, things will go wrong. How ageism against Biden and Trump puts older folks at risk. What would you do if I told you there's a whole demographic group that can't be trusted to work because they're unreliable, bad with technology, slow learners, and most likely not good culture fit? What if I said that a group probably shouldn't even be incorporated into the rest of society, that they should live in their own separate communities, where the rest of us don't have to see or interact with them unless we choose to? Would your hackles be raised? Would that language have you dialing up the ACLU? It probably should. It's called stereotyping. Heard of it? And while many of us, some of us, have trained ourselves to notice how stereotypes work when it comes to things like ethnicity or gender, there are other categories where the practice goes painfully unnoticed, like age. As it becomes increasingly inevitable that our next presidential election will be a contest between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, everyone from comedians to competitors to journalists to doctors to the candidates themselves has had something to say about how old these two men are, and in some cases, why that proves that they're unfit for office. Recently, those conversations have gone to a fever pitch. That's a big problem. Tracy Gendron is a gerontologist and the author of book Ageism Unmasked. She says that like many other giant identity categories, age in and of itself does not tell you what somebody's experiences are, what somebody's values are, and what somebody's health status is, what somebody's cognitive status is. But because many people are taught to fear or demean older people, Gendron says age becomes an easy proxy for other concerns, like what is your ideology? What are actual issues at hand? What are your voting records? What are, the actual things that should make me support a candidate? These conversations about age have consequences outside of our immediate political circumstances. As it turns out, fixating on someone's age can actually put them at a higher risk for exhibiting negative behaviors associated with that age. It's called stereotype threat. For instance, when people are told that members of their age group are likely to struggle with things like memory and or word call, they perform worse on memory tests than people who are primed with information about the vast cognitive capabilities of people their age. Similar studies have been done with gender, race, and many other categories. And guess what? Being told you're going to be bad at something is a remarkably consistent self-fulfilling prophecy. So look, next time you feel tempted to criticize someone, try to focus on the specifics. There are so many nuanced, individualized, intricate reasons to hate on someone, or at least find them unqualified for office. Defaulting to age is just lazy. Who are you? A millennial? More states are finding bird flu in cattle. This is what scientists are watching for. The outbreak of bird flu in dairy cattle is still unfolding. Both North Carolina and South Dakota have detected the virus in dairy herds, bringing the total number of states affected to 8. The unlikely spread among cattle and one dairy worker has scientists looking through the data to better understand the spillover. They say the risk to a human hinges on whether the virus can evolve in key ways to better infect mammals. So far, there's some reassuring news. At a recent meeting, scientists from the U.S. Department of Agriculture said the virus is not presenting like a respiratory illness in cattle, meaning the animals don't appear to be shedding large amounts of virus from their nose or mouths. Instead, federal health officials investigating the outbreak suspect some form of mechanical transmission is responsible for spreading the virus within the herd. This may be happening during the process of milking the cows, a theory supported by the fact that high concentrations of virus are being found in the milk. I want to emphasize how unusual this is, says Thais Cugin, a professor of comparative pathology at Erasmus Medical Center. In other mammalian species with influenza viruses, is primarily a respiratory disease, which doesn't seem to be the case in these cattle. The samples collected from infected animals and shared publicly do not suggest the virus has undergone radical changes that would be cause for alarm. But there are certain signs of trouble in the genome of the virus that scientists are looking out for as it finds a way into more mammals. We really need to keep on top of this because I think we are a bit of a precipice where something interesting or unfortunate could happen, says Michelle Willey, a senior research fellow at the Center of Pathogen Genomics at the University of Melbourne. What to watch out for? A virus evolving to infect humans. Genetic sequences of the virus in the Texas dairy worker showed it had undergone a mutation in a gene, PB2, that commonly gets affected when the virus infects mammals. This is a clue that the virus is evolving to better replicate inside a mammal, but it's not sufficient to make the virus transmit more easily between humans, says Nicola Hill, a disease ecologist at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Sometimes we see these early markers of adaptation, she says. It needs a handful of markers coordinated across multiple different gene segments for it to really be this breakthrough and the next pandemic. And it would need to become better at transmitting through the air, like the seasonal influenza viruses that humans tend to catch. Currently, most cases of bird flu in people are linked to direct contact with an infected animal, oftentimes when a chicken is being slaughtered, says Davis Swain, a poultry veterinarian who used to work for the USDA. It takes a very, very high dose, he says. It's probably not just exposure to infected poultry, it's exposure to processes that aerosolize the virus. But the fear is that could change as the virus spends more time in mammals. Specifically, the protein that the virus uses to bind to cells could evolve to lock onto the receptors in the upper respiratory tract of humans. This would allow it to easily gain access and churn out copies of itself. That's considered basically a main barrier that prevents this from becoming a virus that could spread efficiently between people, says Darwin Kobosa, head of high contaminant respiratory viruses at Canada's National Microbiology Laboratory. When the virus has spilled into mammals, scientists have not seen a lot of evolution in this function over the last few years, says Anise Lowen, a professor of microbiology and immunology at Emory University. Lowen says previous research has shown the protein on the virus would not only need to recognize the human receptors in our upper airways, but also become more stable, presumably so it doesn't fall apart during the transmission through the air. These two changes, plus mutations in the PB2 gene to support replication, would all need to come together to support efficient spread in mammals, she says. Of course, she adds, there's potentially other factors we don't yet understand. There are still big questions about exactly how bird flu plays out in cattle, since it's only been being followed closely. There certainly are many mutations that occur within this jump from wild birds into cattle, and we don't necessarily understand what they mean, says Hill. How mammals may spread it among themselves. Clues from ferrets. With millions of birds infected all over the globe, it's likely that many mammals are being infected through consuming dead birds or being exposed to feces. What Will says the virus may have been introduced into dairy cattle in a similar way. Perhaps infected birds somehow got into their feed. It's not that hard to imagine that we have a sort of contaminated feed situation, she says, but this kind of reasoning may not fully explain mass infection events in some mammals, including unprecedented die-offs of seals and sea lions in South America, and an outbreak in the mink farm in Spain. It's still not clear what's driving transmission in those instances. Maybe animals were spreading it to each other, says Will. Experiments done in labs offer some clues. They have shown mammals can pass on this version of H5N1, and even offer some preliminary evidence suggesting limited airborne transmission. In one recent study, scientists at the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention analyzed how an isolate of the virus taken from a severe human case in Chile spread among ferrets. They found that the variant had a high capacity to cause fatal disease among the animals, and it showed enhanced ability to replicate human cells cultured in the lab, but did not exhibit production transmission in respiratory droplets or via contaminated surface when tested in animals. A separate study by scientists at Canada's National Microbiology Laboratory infected ferrets in the lab with samples of the virus collected from wild animals. Those experiments found a particular version of the virus, taken from a hawk, could transmit very rapidly from ferret to ferret through direct contact and cause lethal infection in the originally uninfected animals, says Kobosa, senior author of the study, which has not yet been published. They also found evidence that virus had spread through the air between ferrets in different cages, but they didn't see severe illness in the animals who were infected in this way. It's possible there wasn't enough virus being transmitted to overcome the immune barriers that would prevent infection, he says. The results are very preliminary, and what happens under controlled lab conditions isn't necessarily indicative of what can happen in the wild, he says. We certainly don't see any changes that would suggest that there's any way to support efficient airborne transmission. While helpful, Lowen says experiments on ferrets need to be interpreted with caution, especially in the context of humans. She says overall, there's still very limited evidence for transmission through the air. The fact that ferrets transmit pretty consistently in contact exposure is a bit concerning, but these results don't throw up a lot of red flags for me. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.